Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Canary Media Forum, Elevating Communications in an Age of Climate Solutions. I'm Stephanie Primavera. I am Canary Media's Director of Creative and Brand Partnerships. I'm excited to have this expert group of marketers here with us today. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. This forum is being recorded. So if you'd like to watch it later and perhaps share with your friends and colleagues, it will be available on Canary Media's YouTube. And while you're there, please like and subscribe. There's also a Q&A chat going on the side for those of us who are watching live. So please feel free to ask questions and upvote any questions that you feel are interesting or relevant. And we'll try to get to some of those during today's discussion and perhaps also leave some time at the end. So today's discussion is going to focus on effective and engaging comms and marketing that advance clean energy. We're going to touch on defining your audience, refining messaging, and also leveraging some different strategies that advance clean energy solutions. So let's get into it with these expert marketers. They're coming to us from a diverse group of organizations, so it should make for an interesting discussion. Fabienne, do you want to maybe kick things off and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. So, hello, everybody. My name is Fabienne Rodet. I'm the VP of Brand Strategy and Communications at 22 and Brand. We are a full-service marketing agency focusing uniquely on renewable energy, clean tech, and climate tech clients in the B2B space. I've been in energy for about 24 years. I started in market research at the Electric Power Research Institute and then moved into the solar industry in 2006, worked for a module manufacturer, worked for a trade association, and then slowly have been consulting with clients across the value chain and have been with 22 and Brand since about 4 years. So thank you. And I'm really excited about this conversation.
Thank you. How about Tiffany? You go next.
Hi, Tiffany Referzo here. I am the head of positioning and communications for the marine business line at Wärtsilä, which is a clean tech solutions for marine and energy. So I'm on the marine side. I have nearly 20 years experience in the clean tech space. I started my career at a PR agency in San Francisco, where I led the public outreach for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission water and wastewater system upgrades, and then moved on to Pacific Gas and Electric Company, where I led their customer communications team. Anything and everything getting into a customer's hand came through my team, which moved me on to working in more the B2B space. I led marketing for an energy storage company called Greensmith Energy, which got acquired by Wärtsilä. And then through that acquisition, I took on a role where I was leading the positioning and communications for the energy space. Then also Bloom Energy, so fuel cells. And then back now with Wärtsilä, leading around future fuel engines, hybrids, electrification, lots of really cool technology in the marine space. So very much looking forward to this conversation. I'm thrilled to be on this panel with all of these amazing professionals. So looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Matt, how about you go next?
We go. I'm Matt Scott. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the director of storytelling and engagement at Project Drawdown, which is a global climate solutions nonprofit. And we like to say the world's leading resource for climate solutions. And I joined Project Drawdown 4 years ago, leading our storytelling work. Within our storytelling work, which I'm sure I'll talk a bunch more about, we have a few signature initiatives, but our main one being the Drawdown's Neighborhood Climate Solutions short docuseries. All of our work, including Drawdown's Neighborhood, focuses on passing the mic to voices that often go unheard, primarily from Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color, and really communicating about not only the power of climate solutions, but the power of storytelling, the power of stakeholders and engaging with those solutions, the power of the science when it comes to climate solutions within the work that we do. And so with Drawdown's Neighborhood, we've had 55 episodes that we put out to date from folks in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Atlanta, Georgia, New Orleans, the Twin Cities, the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and then most recently the San Francisco Bay Area. And prior to joining Project Drawdown 4 years ago, for about 5 years, I worked with an innovation agency where among a range of clients, including the White House, Nike, Walmart, and the like, I works primarily as the global community manager and storyteller of the world's largest global hackathon with NASA, the NASA International Space Apps Challenge. So that's a little about me, but I'm excited to dive in with everyone and lend my storytelling perspective to the conversation.
Awesome. I'm excited too. And last but not least, Adam.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Hey, everyone. First off, just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to connect here in a circle of friends. And I think everyone has introduced themselves before me. I've nodded thinking there's a little bit of a linkage here. Most recently, Matt, you mentioned Pittsburgh. I'm a Pittsburgh native and was just back there over the summer off and on and thinking of what an interesting kind of exemplar of how older cities with diverse populations should be, can be, and I hope will be in approaching the challenges of this transition. That's a theme RMI is really involved in. We're about 40 years old, just turned 42 actually, and I'm about 4 years old at RMI, not quite. My background at RMI kind of comes through a zigzaggy path, primarily as a business journalist in the earliest stages of my career, writing internationally for The Economist Group, and then locally in the US for Business Week, where I feel like some of, maybe all of the companies, Tiffany, you've worked at, I profiled at some stage of their evolution, which is to say that the clean tech story, the innovation story, the efficiency story, the savings and kind of business opportunity has been part of this narrative now for the better part of 20 years. When I come to RMI, I bring a little bit of the journalist's frame to that, which is to say there's a lot of pragmatic, explanatory work that businesses and policymakers and consumers are just interested in understanding that has gotten rather much more complicated, much more qualified, much more politicized in recent years, which makes, I think, the storytelling and unpacking of it very important. My role there at RMI is Chief Storyteller, which is a new title for me, and for those for whom it may be new too. I see as kind of the intersection of marketing and narrative journalism, the idea that marketing thinks strategically and purposefully about how you want to message to whom and how you find them. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we're all facing right now as we grow through this energy transition. And at RMI, that means helping about 700 plus or minus people globally take their research insights and amazing kind of analysis and translating that to the wider world, including partners and consumers and politicians and the like.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is audience. So when starting a new comms initiative or a marketing campaign, first things first is who are you trying to reach? So maybe Fabian, you can start us off and tell us a little bit about your goals and priorities when it comes to building audience.
Yeah, I mean, for us at twentytwo and Brand, building audiences is really a core of our offering, and it drives everything we do across our integrated marketing agency. And our goal really comes to identifying, engaging, and growing audiences for our clients through creating meaningful connection, building long-term relationships to ultimately increase brand loyalty. So, you know, I see this somewhat in like 3 steps. You know, first, we establish relationships. So in our B2B space, we have found that speaking placements at conferences that really narrow target your audience are really effective. Also, co-branded communication opportunities with partners that really elevate and amplify are really great, and things that we use a lot and advise our clients on. The other one is, you know, then moving into gaining customers. And here our preferred approach are campaigns that boost thought leadership with real high quality content assets, like tangible case studies that speak to real world problems and challenges that are backed by quantifiable results. I mean, that is key. Like, we're going to talk about that, I think, throughout, is really using data to quantify the impact. And the next phase would be, once lead generation strategies are in place and you're servicing new clients, then it all becomes about retention. So strategies like webinars, newsletters, in-person customer events, although these can be a little bit more pricey, they're hugely effective. I mean, business is all about people, and it's about building loyalty and repeat business. So I would say those are some of the 3 angles to creating meaningful connection and building audiences. I'd like to pass the baton, but at some point, if we come back to messaging, we can talk some more about that.
Yeah, and Tiffany, you're also coming from a big tech company, so maybe you can also speak to the B2B side of things when it comes to audience.
Yeah, especially since I'm, in-house marketing comms for a big engineering company or clean tech engineering company. It's a little different. I always like to start with what is the business strategy or objective, and then making sure that any of the marketing or communications is tied directly to that. So just as Fabian had said, there's a lot on the funnel and figuring out where the campaign, what's your goals with that campaign. So for us, it could be, whenever we're defining our goals, is it positioning the company for a new customer segment, for example, or entering a new market? Are we maintaining our customer installed base, like you mentioned, with that loyalty, or are we launching a new product? And then based on what that marketing goal is, based on the business strategy, then you can really dive into who is the target audience. And are you trying to market to the end customer and talk to them about their customer pain points, or are you influencing the influencer who influences that end customer? And at least in my current role within the Wärtsilä Marine space, it is very much a balance of the two. It's influencing the influencers. It's, making sure that we have a steady drumbeat in earned media, making sure that we have thought leadership, just as was just mentioned, around speaking opportunities and that third-party validation and speaking with partners, and making sure that we're being seen as the authority in maritime in the greater industry. So it's a lot of influencing the influencer while also creating the steady drumbeat of direct to customer marketing. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about developing the audience.
Great. And Adam, I know at RMI, you guys have a very large audience. You're looking at global, in a global sense, and also hyper local as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I was nodding, listening to both Fabian and Tiffany, thinking about how we are adapting what have been long evolved and highly refined marketing strategies to an organization that in many ways has its roots closer to a think tank or an academic kind of an analytical group. And if you transpose what we did for the last 40 years into sort of marketing ideas, it's kind of the product is influence. The product is to sway often partners, governments, businesses, individuals, professionals, to recognize the potential and act accordingly, so that they aren't necessarily following older habits of, maybe it's an older habit of energy choice and what they buy. On one hand, we've been incredibly successful building a messaging channel, almost the way you might imagine kind of a bespoke specialty store has done, meaning very high touch, very direct contact. Our brains, our roaming experts, sometimes I call them our brains, are out in the field. And historically, that's meant person-to-person meetings or small groups. Lately, that's meant more webinars and a little bit more direct digital communication. But I think as we recognize with both with the scale of the problem of climate and also our kind of organic growth, that the two are changing so quickly together, there's really an awakening at RMI of the need to scale how we can talk to people. So as much as we nurture and want reports and one-on-one communication to continue to build really strong trust, there's a whole world of people kind of knocking on our door with curiosity. I think of one of our primary audiences as someone in a state that may not be California or Massachusetts or New York, curious about what they've been hearing in other states with investment and why new jobs are happening there, but not here. And so their media space, their political space may not have them in contact with us regularly. How do we find them? How do we kind of deliver the facts and kind of case studies that, as Fabian mentioned, case studies, it's really powerful. We are nonpartisan by our roots. And I mentioned that, I would mention that anytime, but certainly right now it matters a lot in that the pragmatism and case making around these solutions, we're pretty confident will continue to appeal. And, as we've seen, there's a lot of concern right now with kind of quality of life, of security, of energy. And what's, I think, really appealing about the kind of foundation level of these stories, and the more we can tell them and repeat them and explain the technology and explain the benefits, the further they travel. There's a risk of that sounding naive, I realize. You don't want it to just sound flatly hopeful. And I think you have to be honest with the nuance of how it's happening. But we are at a stage where we can show and document, not just years, but decades of progress, decades of improvement. And that points me to the other front I'd mentioned here in this group, partly because I'm curious to hear how others approach it. We've grown up and made a lot of impact in the United States, really interesting, unique market in many ways globally. But as we all know, the population growth, energy demand growth is a global dynamic. And as we look to take what we know are proven solutions to the economies that are now the center of rising energy growth, and in many ways probably should be looking to renewables first before anything else, how can we get them to be aware of and learn about us? And that's, for us, a new challenge. We haven't, until very recently, begun to build out a kind of digital marketing analytics stack to understand who are we talking to now, like literally knowing myself, let alone how do we find thy new selves, meaning hopefully there's all the RMI fans we have in North America, they're mirrored in India and China and Vietnam and the Philippines. All of those countries are going through rapid growth. They have people in these industries, they have consumers, they have builders, they have energy professionals. But it's a noisy environment that might be a non-English language environment. Similar stories in Africa, in Latin America, and we're looking across all of them, hoping to kind of continue to extend that community, but using, I think, a little bit more sophisticated global thinking around how we can recognize what their local habits are. It might be Facebook, it might not be a newsletter, it might be Instagram, which isn't something we've historically had a depth of practice in, but are going to build now and try and think more strategically around.
Yeah, great. And Matt, how are you thinking about audience at Project Drawdown?
Yeah, I love where you landed that, Adam, because there's a phrase that's come to mind for me a lot in my work over the last decade, which has been to put people at the center. And really overall, I mean, there are two things I think that we think about. And I should also say, I lead our storytelling and engagement program, but we also have a marketing and communications team that's more in the weeds with just the tactics when it comes to our paid, earned, shared, and owned work. But overall, first and foremost, I would say impact is key for us. And one of the biggest ways that we can make that impact, again, is by meeting people where they are. So whether that's through events or connecting with communities where folks are already convened, we're constantly thinking, how could we take what Project Drawdown's offering, so these resources around the science, climate solutions. There are nearly 100 climate solutions that Project Drawdown's identified, beginning with the 2017 New York Times bestseller Drawdown, and then continuing and updating ever since. There are resources we have for stakeholders. So we have a lot of resources for employees and for corporations, and increasingly for philanthropists and investors to support them in their work. And then with the storytelling work that I lead, it's really a bit more focused on the on everyday people, on educators, on students, on youth communities, on other organizations that we don't touch. So otherwise, we go beyond the corporations, the investors, the philanthropists, the scientists, the policymakers who we connect with in our other work to really connect with these community change makers. And with each and every one of them, as we all know, different people communicate about climate or speak about climate in different ways. They have different priorities. And the thing that I really love about that is that for one group, what will be most interesting is jobs that are being created or lowering emissions within their sustainability department. In another group, it might be how do we equip the next generation of leaders with the skills and tools and resources they need in order to be impactful leaders to take on a range of roles. And so overall, what's so interesting about Project Drawdown is that we do serve and reach a range of audiences. I would say that that sort of happened out of necessity, and because after the 2017 book came out, a lot of audiences started to use Project Drawdown, but also had the question of, like, what's my role? What can I do? And so we speak to those various audiences in those ways. And so I would say there's a different approach with each audience, but coming from a community management and community engagement perspective myself, and I see this reflected throughout our organization, that we're really big on listening to the audiences, listening to what they need and what's helpful. We are a relatively small nonprofit, which people are always surprised to hear with how much Project Drawdown shows up, but about 25 people or so on our team. And what's fascinating about that is that also forces us to focus on what our role is and how we can show up rather than, trying to do everything at once. And so with our audience, our different audiences across our work, it is really targeted about what do they need, where are their gaps that we could fill as a resource, and where can we leave it at that rather than trying to solve everything for them like, a much larger organization can. And so it's been great to see the ways that we could equip folks and what they do with our work. And that's what we really focus on, is connecting our audiences with those resources that equip them so that they could really run with them. And hopefully they report back that impact at the end of the day, because again, that's what matters most to us, is that impact in service of our mission, in service of probably a mission of a lot of us, to help stop climate change as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Meeting people where they are. And I think this kind of naturally leads into my next question, which is about messaging. And as marketers in this space, one of our biggest challenges can be communicating complex technical topics to a very diverse audience, as everyone here just mentioned. And a lot of those people can be new to clean energy. And in moments like that, it can be pretty critical to talk like a human. So I just would like to, know how does that fit into the work you do every day? And this already seems to be like a common thread in the Q&A portion. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How about Adam? You kick us off.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny, Stephanie, as we were gabbing in our pre-preparation of this, you surfaced the idea of talking like a human. And RMI, over the last year or so, had gone through an exercise, and it's ongoing now, of bringing in experts to speak with our, communications experts, to speak with our technical energy experts, and the two worlds meeting. And what's interesting about Talk Like a Human is it sounds very instinctive, I think, for this community and those of us who kind of live and breathe stories. And what's fascinating about having those two tribes meet at RMI is there's a lot of science behind Talk Like a Human, and there's a lot of human in the energy experts. The energy experts often don't necessarily think first about that, though, and understandably, the complexity of explaining, deploying, financing, approving a clean and industrial hub in LA is life's work. It is hard to get that down, and the amount of knowledge you need and technical. And yet behind that is a whole interesting narrative of, how does industry work today? How did it get to be what it is now? Who's changed by the change? What will make it unfold? On the other hand, the Talk Like a Human research is really fascinating to the degree that even when you're talking to experts who think in industrial decarbonization, they are just as likely to grab at, hold on to, and remember a story about a human dimension of that same technical issue as a layman is. And so one of, I think my job's kind of as an evangelist for this internally, generally as a good storyteller, is to remember that it's okay. It's not only good to do, it's not only okay to do, it's good to do. And we face a little bit, I think, of understandable resistance to it with experts who really want to get to the point, get to the frontier of an issue. But I always advocate that it's worth taking the time working with someone like me or communicators in this circle to kind of think through, workshop, unpack the narrative around the technical issue. The technical issue needs its own care and explanation, and there's a lot of great ways to do that. But talking like a human can mean you're not only talking about humans, meaning people who embody the idea, but talking like a human as you might at Thanksgiving dinner to explain to laymen in sort of simpler terms that they can relate to. Why do I care that LA may clean up its industrial hubs? And what does that mean? It's very far off. A lot of the stuff, and one of the challenges of communicating energy, climate generally, to use the wonky phrase, it's temporally distant. It's often years ahead, years away. The problems are here and now, and bridging those two things can feel unsatisfying, I think, to audiences that are looking for immediacy. And when you can, I think, name a problem that someone's experiencing today, whether that's extreme heat, and then draw the illusion to some of the solutions that will take years to build because it's taken years to make the problem. All of those are examples of kind of narrating and I think understanding and being empathetic to your audience to bring the idea to them. As Matt was saying, many audiences have different ways into it, but kind of testing and trying and giving as much sort of, I think, life to it as you can. And that invites more people in.
Yeah, great. Fabian, I'd be interested to get your perspective from an agency and working with different clients.
Well, I mean, I would say, most of our clients are positioning really highly technical products and services. And I loved, Adam, how you position them as tribes. I mean, engineers think in terms of features and function. And as marketers, we think in terms of benefits and solutions. And so when I'm talking to a subject matter expert who has a PhD in geology and I'm learning about the corrosive nature of soils against racking foundations, I mean, that requires a specific skill. So being able to translate that engineer speak and turn it into a compelling narrative that all of the different business audiences can relate to, I mean, it's key and it's sometimes challenging, but I think it's really about everything that you said about connecting to the human really resonates with me. And yes, of course, sometimes we come across a little bit of some opposition. Maybe it's a technical or a financial SME is really going to want to stick to the acronyms and the jargon that he or she are comfortable with in order to feel like their communications is going to be robust and well received. And so being able to navigate that, I think, is also really important.
Yeah, and getting, audiences to engage with a company or a brand can be especially challenging at times. And I'm sure Tiffany in a B2B space, you know all about that. So I'm wondering, what strategies are you employing to effectively, leverage data and do storytelling that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing to note is we are a global company. So things get lost in translation and simple, clear messaging is best. We were talking on a call yesterday and there was no word for one of the words that we were going to use. And I'm going, why? We need to make it more simple. And it's drilled into my head from my agency days. You need to write for a 7th grader. Everybody can be incredibly smart and intelligent. Let's save it for the college, secondary education, but let's make it easy. So to your point, Fabian, Adam, you can talk about it at the dinner table. Part of that is, how do we take that crunchy data and, some of this really, really crunchy data that we're getting from these SMEs, and how do we make it relatable? One of the things that we did at Wärtsilä around the pandemic was we had all this beautiful power system modeling data. So pretend like there's a green field, no existing infrastructure. what would 100% renewable energy system look like for that specific geography? And we did that for different regions in the world. And that's really cool, but how do you tell that story? And what we did was we had the modeling, the crunchy data that all of the engineers love, but then we made it easy to understand. We created an interactive map and tool so you could actually visualize the change, right? So America has a different renewable system than Germany, than, the Philippines. And we had this tool, we launched it, and then we also released, I would say, a little bit more of a light, technical paper light report that kind of then took that analysis and made it really easy to understand. And we launched it as a campaign. We tied it to give it that hook. We tied it to the stimulus packages that were coming out of the pandemic. And so if we're getting all the stimulus money to, generate and stimulate the economy, what if you invested it into these renewable systems? So we had the campaign, the interactive tool, we had the report, we had the crunchy data, we did a whole roadshow, we did a webinar, we got earned media, we did some paid, we did a lot of organic, and then we did some content syndications with some of the earned media outlets or the earned media outlets that we wanted to get into. And it was a wildly successful campaign, and we were able to use that as a launch pad. And they've actually continued this power system modeling to this day. So the last couple of years, really diving more deeper into that crunchy data and making it an easy conversation to have at the dinner table. Like, wow, I had no idea that we could have, X amount of solar or wind whenever we have this system. So just trying to help visualize and make very simple the crunchy data for us. So
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's fun.
I love that crunchy data. And Matt, I'd like to turn to you, and perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about people-driven stories and how important that can be in messaging and engaging.
Yeah. I think that, I love everything that's been mentioned so far in regard to just considerations for talking more like a person. And one of the things that I found just really successful, even engaging with folks, because I studied marketing, and for the first couple of years of my career, I was working in social media marketing and on different advocacy campaigns. And one of the first campaigns that I worked on that ended up being, really successful for us was called the Internet for Schools campaign. And it was all about, advocating and pushing the FCC to update and modernize the E-rate program in schools and libraries. So that's the Internet Access Program in schools and libraries. And, ultimately the campaign, the Internet for Schools campaign that we, championed, engaging other organizations, ended up being successful and modernizing E-rate by $1.5 billion. And at the core of that, which the metrics showed, was that these influencer videos or influencer tactics were really helpful. So this was before there were professional influencers in the way that there are now, but we would have teachers and librarians and students just recording short videos with their phones, sharing why they cared about this, why it was so important to them, how it would support their education and their learning. And for me, that was the start of really a career looking to the community voices, looking to influencers to put an issue in their own terms. I think one of the issues that we face at times as communicators is that we want control. And I would imagine that all of us, especially looking at leadership within organizations that we've been in, need to let our leadership know, hey, sometimes we need to relinquish that control. We could get the point across without sticking to, messaging that's just based in the data or messaging that's just based in the science, which is one thing I really appreciate about Project Drawdown is that, as a science-based organization with a phenomenal team of scientists, there's also this recognition that communicating just the science, communicating just the data doesn't get through to people and motivate action in ways that human stories do. And so when I look at our work with stories, which we do through the Drawdowns Neighborhood docuseries, through another initiative called the Global Solutions Diary, where this year we've just started soliciting videos from all around the world, and so far have had submissions from 25 plus countries. What I love about that is that there are all these different voices. Each and every story is a different voice and a different way of communicating the importance of an issue. So it doesn't need to be about underscoring and communicating the exact data and the science, because at the end of the day, what we want people to move in the right directions. That means that they could make a decision that's more beneficial for their organization or for their community, without necessarily knowing all of the science and the data. If they trust the science and data and can see that, like, this is what we need to do to move toward a world where we're helping stop climate change, that's what we really want. And sometimes people need, or I should say often people need, those stories as the entry point to connect, to better understand the issues, the science, and the data. I'll say, as a non-scientist myself, I know that personally. And just to the point of what we're talking about, in terms of, talking like a person, I think it's really critical that any communication shop or any storytelling shop or any room have people who, are not the science and the climate nerds or environmental nerds, so to speak. I say that lovingly, because we need the science and climate nerds in the room. But having people who don't have that perspective, who could say, hey, this is a little bit too wonky, I don't get this, how could we make this more accessible to more folks, is really key. And I've found that through highlighting and amplifying the voices that we amplify, that it allows more people to enter the conversation and connect with the conversation.
Yeah, I love the idea of librarian influencers. I would definitely like to see more of those. Great. So I'm looking through the chat questions right now, and there's definitely a lot of people asking questions related to the election and the upcoming administration change. And I know a lot of us who work in clean energy are a bit uncertain about the future. So I am wondering, in this, complex new landscape that we're navigating, how are we looking at as marketers? And is that changing our messaging? Is that changing the audiences that we're trying to reach? Adam, maybe you can kick us off with this one.
Yeah, I was on a call yesterday with one of our leaders who put it in a way I loved, that we are waiting for the Jell-O to firm up first. And Jell-O can hold a lot of things. It can be different colors.
Mm-hmm.
I won't abuse the metaphor, but the point being, as I mentioned, we're nonpartisan and have thrived through, I think one of the earliest photographs of RMI is the founder, Amory Lovins, with Jimmy Carter, who famously put solar panels on the White House that Ronald Reagan then removed, and have continued to find ways to work with each administration and with the federal government, and increasingly, and this will get to my sort of a more specific answer, state level, local level, and global actors. And each of them is really important. And I don't want to speculate on where the federal policy will go, what the tenor will be, what priorities they'll have. We just don't know yet. However, we do see that the tide of shift is so widespread globally, locally, at the state level, that the appetite and need for advice is really strong. There's an enormous amount of speculation right now on which actors may want to hold on to which incentives, given they're benefiting, regions that may have voted for a person that doesn't want them to be there. It's a really messy layer cake right now. And I will go back to what I emphasized about the pragmatism of our approach, but I think the energy transition writ large, and just was looking at some data coming into this call about exit polling showing that it depends always on how you frame the language, but when you emphasize the benefits of the energy transition, stability, security, affordability, accessibility, it cuts across every demographic nationally, every political party, there's been a lot of hand-wringing over all the shifts of political voting across the lines that used to be assumed before. And I just think that if you hold on to that idea, the promise and potential for a lot of this work to go on as it's been sort of unlocked by market mechanisms alone, certainly facilitated by public money, and we really hope that'll continue, has enormous potential. How we message that, I think, is also still waiting to firm up. But there's a lot to be said that as we've already depended on and found a lot of partnership with local communities, and as I emphasized earlier, global communities, they're both harder to find, actually. It's in a funny way, I think a lot of us can become comfortable with beltway messaging. That's super important. Those are some of the most powerful decision makers. Finding some of those more hypothetical economic development officers in regions that haven't been in that first wave of energy investment, but are now witnessing a lot of the growth and are understanding some of the climate vulnerabilities. Finding those communities, identifying them through sort of digital mechanisms, but also again just through telling the story of what we've done, and maybe in places that are not the assumed sort of centers of a lot of this transition already. Surprising places, surprising populations, I think can help connect and deliver that story.
Yeah, and Matt, I'd also like to throw this question over to you, but I am also seeing in the Q&A chat, the top question, which kind of ties into this. Samantha is asking about the vocabulary to use when talking about climate change, especially in the next 4 years, as to not alienate any audiences. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure thing. And I think it's very interesting to think about just how we speak about these issues. One thing that I've reflected a lot on, not only in the last couple of weeks, but just in the last several months, and maybe even throughout my career, is just that we always need to be thinking about ways to make sure that conversations that we're having are accessible. So obviously, I think a lot of us get caught up in terms or jargon that we use in our industries, or acronyms that we use, and being incredibly mindful of that's important. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to how we can speak, I keep going back to the speak like a human or talking like a human of it all, that what does your audience understand? So I would almost turn back to you and ask you, if you're connecting with your audience, like 10 audience members that are representative of the folks that you want to reach, what kind of communication do they need? Not everything that everyone does needs to be at the basic level that a third grader or a seventh grader could understand, even though I personally appreciate when anything is at that level, because that's my level of understanding for a lot of these topics. But I really do think that to kind of get out of our heads and at a base level think, okay, who's in the room? What do they need in order to be engaged in the room, rather and not alienated and not left behind? So I really love, just to bring that to something more practical, I love, stakeholder interviews. I love when there are focus groups or other conversations. I love talking with trusted partners who work with those communities to understand from them how we can make resources and information more accessible. You don't need to talk with everyone in your audience to get an idea of what's most helpful to them. And then once you have that language figured out, which I think kind of speaks to the last question a bit, I mean, run with it. We at Project Drawdown are also a nonpartisan organization similar to RMI and Adam's team. And going into the next 4 years and the 4 years after that, I'm sure we'll continue to evolve over that time. But what's important is to recognize that regardless of administrations or elected offices, we found that people are able to use our resources in order to be stronger in advocating, in making decisions, in pushing change forward for their respective communities. And so I find that, it's been good to be confident in the approach we're taking, language included, bridging to that. But really, we are more than anything just focused on doubling down on our mission in our work. One thing that I've heard more than anything from folks in the last few weeks is, wow, Matt, the work that you're doing to amplify underrepresented voices, to make these spaces more accessible to people, it's more important than ever. And, I'm thinking this has always been important, but it's good that people could see the importance and engage with that importance. And again, I'll just stress the point that when you have more diverse voices and a range of voices in the room, that really helps create something that is more accessible, that is more inviting, that's more connected with folks, and again, meets them where they are.
Yep. It's all about meeting them where they are. I agree. So just to move on a little bit, we've talked about audience, we've talked about messaging, and, then it comes time to perhaps actually launch your campaign. So I'm just wondering, what is the playbook for a successful campaign, and also a holistic one? Fabian, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So for us, I mean, our core strategies for successful campaigns, we kind of see it, we combine two different components together. The first one is integration. So we need to ensure that all of the dimensions of the brand and the personality is carried through everything from your website, your visual tone and voice, the content, and everything needs to be really integrated. And the other one is innovation. How can we really help to identify those unique points of differentiation, especially in some very competitive markets? So I would say, if I were to give an example of a campaign that I was really, what we really enjoyed, was creating synergies amongst partners. So when we try to do this as much as we can, and one specific project comes to mind is when we brought together 5 different companies along the value chain that all worked on the largest solar landfill project in the US. So we had the developer, the EPC, the racking manufacturer, an engineering firm, and even the company that built the concrete foundation blocks. And so we worked with a team and put together an integrated campaign that really focused on from trash to treasure. I think it was turning unproductive landfills into solar-powered revenue. And that included a press release, a really meaty, detailed case study for the media, and project awards. And I think ultimately the biggest sign of success was they were awarded the Renewable Energy Plant of the Year award from Power Magazine. So I think, kind of summarizing it, it's integrating, innovating unique ways to connect, and leveraging synergies, I would say, is kind of one of our secret sauces for successful campaigns.
Great. And Tiffany, I'm also interested in hearing from you. And one of the things I'm just in general as a marketer, I'm always looking for and I'm always interested is, where is the low-hanging fruit and where are you getting the biggest bang for your buck?
Great question. I think for me, it always starts with, earlier I said, start with the business objectives. What are you trying to do to help drive the business forward? Then from a marketing communications perspective, I feel like you need to have a very clear messaging platform. And we've kind of talked about this on this call, really clearly articulating your brand value, what's the industry landscape, what's your unique value proposition in that market, and then how are you showing up for your customers or the people that you're trying to influence or talk to. That's the foundation for all of your marketing. That's the low-hanging fruit. If you can dial that in, then it makes it more crystal clear to see what type of campaign you could do. Whether it's, doing an owned content piece or, doing a webinar or all these many, menu of tactics that you can choose from, as long as you have a very clear messaging platform, everything will ring true to the audience that you're trying to get to. Another kind of low-hanging fruit, an example is we just did earlier this year, again, I'm going to talk about a crunchy data report, but it's a challenge of this industry that I'm in right now in the maritime. So we're responsible for 80% of the world trade, maritime is, and we have the 2% of the emissions. And we have this remit by our regulator, International Maritime Organization, to decarb by 2050. That sounds like a lot far time away, but it's actually one vessel lifetime away. So if you think about it in the context of having to decarbonize or go electric for the automotive industry. So the decisions made today are going to impact that 2050. And one of the big things is around this future fuels, right? It's kind of that chicken or egg. When are we going to get future fuels? But we need the demand first. So it's this whole thing. So it's a complex issue. And we created what we called a future fuels roadmap. And we did, I would say, a report on it. It was very long. It's probably more crunchy than I would have liked, but it's talked to the audience, exactly like you said, Matt. Sometimes you need to throw out the 7th grade and you need to talk to who you want to reach. And we launched this report in March of 2024. It was a labor of love, I will say, internally. And it continues to be the top viewed and most downloaded piece of content, now with almost 3,500 downloads since March, which is huge for our brand. We got 70 pieces of content, like earned media out of it, lots of like really nice little metrics. But the core of the low-hanging fruit was it was a customer pain point that we were speaking to. And we knew that because we did our messaging platform and we said, oh, this is something that's a very complex topic that, I could speak about at length, but how do we make it easy? How do we create a piece of content that answers our customers' pain point, that answers what they're already searching for? We're not saying we're the expert, but here's some information as they kind of decide what is the investment that they're going to make today to meet that 2050 regulation. And again, it just continues to generate a lot of traffic and interest. And so I felt like we kind of hit that pulse point for the person that we were trying to speak to. So I think low-hanging fruit is understand what your messaging is and what is that message that you want to get to the audience.
Great. And how about Matt? How do you think about your campaigns and what's your playbook?
Yeah, the one piece I definitely just want to add, because there's so much that's come up in this conversation already, but something that we haven't, I think, spoken about as much as just how could we activate our existing audiences in order to get them to serve as ambassadors of the work that we're doing, get them to amplify what we're doing. And I actually often, when I think about that, think back to the work I mentioned prior to Project Drawdown on the NASA International Space Apps Challenge. And as context, now it's this global hackathon event where over the course of one weekend each year, nearly 100,000 people come together. I believe it was 160 something countries this year to create or prototype solutions to problems on Earth and in space. And when I first got involved in that program, which was in April 2016, I remember asking one of the founders of that program, the Space Apps program, like, why do you think it is that all of these people just show up and, over the course of, 48 to 72 hours, barely get any sleep, work with strangers they don't know, try things out that they've never tried out? Like, why do you think people are doing this? And that founder of the initiative mentioned to me that the secret was permission. And that really is popped up for me again and again, because I think of how many times even I in my work might do something where I'm putting out a message or putting out a resource, putting out information, and not giving the audience permission or even inviting the audience to share how's that landing with them. So Tiffany, as you were talking about some of your work and the impact it's had, my mind goes to, oh my gosh, there's so many impact stories that people want to share that they might not even know are interesting or helpful, or that they have the ability to get others on board. And so I personally am a big fan within our Drawdown storytelling program, but also within Project Drawdown more broadly, of pushing us to find ways to collect those impact stories and amplify them, or in general to invite people and encourage people to share via social media and the like that they are enjoying or benefiting from or learning from or leveraging our work in one way or the other, because often we don't know those stories. I remember back in 2021, actually, when I was going to produce our first series of the Drawdowns Neighborhood docuseries, which, by the way, folks could check out at drawdown.org/neighborhood, that I connected with the city of Pittsburgh's sustainability officer at the time, and we hopped onto a Zoom call, and out of nowhere, he pulls up the Drawdown book and it's saying, oh my gosh, this is marked up. And I saw the Post-it notes hanging out of it. And that for me has been an occurrence time and time again, where I keep hearing from people that I didn't know love what we do and are using what we do, because we haven't always given them permission and invited them to share those stories. So it's definitely something we always work on. How do we get audience members to share our work? And on our end, through our campaigns, through our work, we would then benefit through the social influence of them and the social effect of just sharing work in that way. But that's the biggest thing I'd want to bring in the conversation, is finding more ways to activate the audiences you do have, because it's great to know who's following you, but if they're just following and not serving as ambassadors of the work, then there's a massive missed opportunity. And that those ambassadors and the outreach that they do could be some of the work that grows what you're doing and exposes what you're doing to audiences you wouldn't have reached otherwise.
Yeah, great. Well, we are starting to run out of time, but I do want to get to Adam. And Adam, maybe you can, also elaborate on this and tell us where the low-hanging fruit is at RMI, and also maybe speak to some of the different channels that you find, or platforms even, that you find to be
and maybe qualify a quick answer with maybe a bookend, a question to sort of leave us with a question and a challenge. It's one I'm wrestling with. Excuse me, RMI, unlike some other nonprofits we may sometimes be associated with, from World Economic Forum to WRI to NRDC or Sierra Club, we've historically been very kind of expert focused, kind of speaking to the experts initially. And it's a wonderful opportunity. It's something I think that's harder for some organizations to find their way to that exclusive audience, because they're good at talking to the big audience first. We're kind of working our way up from the experts, or out maybe from inside to the experts, and beginning to explore and understand the power of a lot of what Matt's talked about here, of wider aperture, meaning more shorter, more relatable stories that can travel a long way. If that sounds like social, that's one of the main channels we're looking at. Knowing that there's simultaneously our community who we can activate, who we know loves us and has been with us for 40 years, is into the wonkery of like our ratings for thermal insulation on buildings. We can service them. That data is interesting, and what's interesting is it goes both ways. Sometimes the newbies want to learn about that stuff, and we can feed them, nourish them, and grow them with some of the technical stuff. But oftentimes they need the context that we're not offering. We're not explaining why it all fits together and how. I think that, kind of being mindful of that simultaneous need, you can service and build and maintain your experts while drawing in all the new climate curious people out in the world that are multiplying faster probably than we can really recognize and serve them. My bigger question, and I think the thing I worry about right now, is we know who likes us. We kind of talk to them more comfortably than those who don't know us or don't like us. And as the kind of media space has scattered and flattened, and by flattening, I mean big, pillars of old media, CBS and New York Times, which would have endorsed and carried a lot of this news to most of the population, have shrunken. And those audiences have migrated into their own chambers. What I want to be able to do is to build a message that can travel out of the bubble I know and that trusts me, and finds its way into those bubbles where they can hear it and register it with curiosity and engagement, and not see it as purely politicized. I know it's an ideal, but I do think that that's one of the biggest challenges we face right now, is we're sort of trying to think a little bit beyond where we're at, and who needs to sort of think differently and hopefully change their attitudes and adapt and sort of find synergy with what we're talking about here.
Great. Yeah. I mean, this is certainly an interesting conversation and definitely an ongoing one as this landscape continues to develop for us. I wish we had more time. I know we could keep going. I'm sorry we didn't get to more of the audience questions, but this has certainly been a very fascinating conversation for me. Again, this conversation will be available on Canary Media's YouTube page in a few days if you'd like to rewatch. And if you are a nonprofit or a corporate organization looking for help with your messaging or your campaigns, here at Canary Creative, we're here to help. You can reach us at hello@canarymedia.com. And I just really want to thank all these expert marketers for joining us today. This was a wonderful discussion. And, I look forward to learning more about you in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for having us.